You're a mimic. You were disguised as a chair in a dungeon when an adventurer decided to take you as loot. You've actually enjoyed your life ever since as furniture in a jolly tavern. So when some ruffians try to rob the now elderly adventurer's business, you finally reveal yourself. Story 1. I never knew exactly why he took me out of that dungeon. There was more gold to be grabbed, more jewels to steal, but he took me. A chair. I think he wanted a memento. He never went on another adventure after that, instead opting to use the riches from his adventuring to build this cozy little tavern with me as a prized seat for guests of honor. The chair from his final grand exploit. A relic of his old life. I could have eaten him, of course. Would have been easy. He had no idea I was a mimic. Spent much of the travels on his back, near him when he slept, all exceedingly vulnerable times when I could have struck. But, to see the outside world after so long? See how much has changed over the centuries? Weighed against a single meal, the choice was clear. And with that, I was just a chair in a tavern. And it's incredible. I had no idea how much I was missing stuck in that dusty old castle. There is so much to be experienced, to be seen. I have seen people of races, shapes and colors I never dared imagine. I've learned languages I would have once thought to be simple noise. I've heard tales of love lost and triumph earned. This tavern teems with life, with variety, and I'd not give it up for anything. Oh, and the food. I never hurt a hair on the patrons, but sometimes they rest a meal on me for a moment or some scraps fall off the table. You might think it undignified, but compared to eating rats and men alike in a dungeon, I was eating like a king, both in variety and in style. There are these little things made of flour and eggs, dumplings I believe, that are simply to die for. And so I have lived for 33 outstanding years. But, well, trouble had to come a-knocking at some point. This time in the form of 3 low-life scum who thought the jolly tavern of an old man would make an easy target. They broke the window with a club and poured in, stinking of manure and ill intentions. Before too long they started pocketing anything that seemed of value. Silverware, glass cups, bottles of spirit. It reminded me of the many so-called heroes I've met back in my day. I could have tolerated it, perhaps, had Eleanor, his wife, not come down to investigate the noise. Hey! Who are dash? She barely got 3 words out before one of them smacked her across the head with the club he'd been carrying, knocking her to the ground. And with that, my patience was out. I was rusty. Had not been in a fight for 33 years. But these ingrates might as well have been sheep. The crunching of their bones, the blood splatters on the wall, the screams of pure unbridled terror, brought back memories. Not all good. But, with a past like mine? You're gonna carry that weight. The adventurer, well, I don't think he'd call himself that anymore with his grey hair and wrinkled face, rushed in with his sword drawn, just seconds too late to see me. He was shockingly spry for a man of his age. Old habits die hard, don't they, old friend? He inspected the room with an experienced eye, noting the blood and body parts but seeing his wife, forgot all of that and rushed to her aid. Elle! He yelled. Are you all right? She sat up clutching her forehead. Oh, damn it! The sucker blindsided me, she said and pulled her hand away. There was a fair amount of blood on it. Gods, you're bleeding. Here, let me dash. And to both mine and his surprise, she laughed. Oh come on, she said. This is nothing. I may be old but I'm not decrepit, Mika. Remember that troll in Lower Durth? Now that was an injury. He chuckled and helped her sit on a nearby chair. My, you did a number on them, she said and gestured towards the carnage in the tavern. Haven't changed one bit, she smiled. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously and walked forward, inspecting the bodies, blood, the pattern of their injuries, all leading back to me. A tooth fell off of me with a soft tap on the wooden floor. He approached me cautiously. I felt the heat radiating from his sword, the silver lining threatening a terrible pain should it fall upon me. And when he got too close, I slipped. I creaked. He gripped his sword tighter but then, relaxed. He looked at the bodies of the brigands and then at his wife, alive and mostly well. His face shifted and cycled through several different emotions before his eyes softened and he sheathed his sword, returning to his wife. Come, he said. Let's get that cleaned up. Who were they anyway? She asked. Thieves? Think so? She chuckled. Maybe they were after your famous special chair. You know, he said and turned towards me briefly with a smile, after all this time, I see it more as an old friend. Story 2. Edgar sat back in his favorite chair, the one passed down from his father, and his father's father before him. It wasn't a particularly special chair, though it was a nice mahogany, or so he thought. He'd kept up on the finish, made sure to check and make sure the legs and their cross-sections were secure. It had survived so many accidents in its life in their family. The butt of a silly joke of his grandfather's, he delved deep into a vampire's lair. A few of his comrades had found themselves face to face with the fiend, who had kidnapped townsfolk to feed on and make his own thralls. Vampire sat across them from a long table in this very chair, lips and chin soaked in dried blood. The bastard apparently didn't even clean himself up after a meal, as was apparent also by the random dried splatters and the smells of death. No sooner did the vampire stand, did he crack his knee on the table, losing his balance and falling back, breaking the top of the chair off as he fell, and impaled himself on the jagged remains of the left post of it. The chair had killed the vampire. After everything was said and done, his grandfather couldn't leave the hero behind, and removed the wretch from it as he and his allies laughed, taking turns carrying it all the way up. He spent weeks finding the right wood and materials, and swore that when he went to grab it from the shed, it was already fixed. As if nothing had happened. Assuming it to just be a well-meant prank from one of those who knew about it, it was brought into the house. 70 years later, and now in Edgar's possession, its place of residence was his grandfather's inn and tavern. The chair was a particular part of a fun party game couples would play, the drunk among them saying they could feel a thump under their arse if their soulmate was before them. Edgar merely thought it was the younger patrons trying to have a laugh, but it was all in good fun. It was late in the evening, most patrons had left, or gone to their rooms, and it was just Edgar, his wife Henrietta, and a local boy, Terry, hired as a dishwasher, but more of a son the both couldn't have, Henrietta being unable to conceive. Edgar pulled the glasses from his face, wiping them clean. That lot was a handful tonight, but we made some heavy coin, he smiled. Henrietta carried over the ledger, poring over the numbers. The more business-minded of the two, Edgar was more of a people person, getting along with folks and creatures from all walks of life. I guess it helps that we let the kobolds in too, he chuckled. As Henrietta neared, Edgar felt a thump beneath his chair, looking down. Nah. Couldn't. He was cut off as there was a louder thump, the sound of the door slamming open and a crossbow bolt nearly hitting his leg, sailing into the bar behind him. The hell's going on? He yelled, standing quickly, looking to his wife and Terry to hide, as he ran behind the bar, grasping for the mace he kept hidden, the cobwebs lifting from it a tell he'd never had to use it. Shaky hands held the mace as he peeked up over the bar, noticing several leather-bound brigands from the nearby forest enter. They laughed as they entered, a larger one making a point to slam his axe into the door, several others entering and knocking things from shelves, gathering what they thought would sell. We saw ya, now just give us that pretty lady and your coin and maybe we'll let you live, a gruff voice spoke, clearly the leader of this little group. Edgar's hand gripped the mace tightly. He'd never surrender his wife, and he knew he'd die, but if he distracted them, Terry and Henrietta could escape out the back, so he thought. His thought, however, was ripped from his mind from the sudden blood-curdling scream that echoed through the tavern. One of them just lay in the middle of the floor, a bloody stump where his leg once was, nothing else around, no sign of an attacker, just a chair. The hell happened? The leader spoke, attention turning to the brigand who was now going into shock, pointing at the chair as the color was draining from his body as fast as the blood from his leg. The leader growled angrily. The shit does this chair have to do with it? He said, angrily kicking the piece of furniture, until he was screaming too as the dimensions around the chair seemed to warp, engulfing his leg in a world of vicious razor-sharp teeth, collapsing around his leg and tearing through it as if it wasn't even there. Boss. What is that? More screams rang out. Edgar peered over the bar, wide-eyed as the chair he was sitting in not seconds ago was now, alive? And growling menacingly, warping its frame into sharp wooden tendrils that grasped and tore limbs gruesomely. The leader and several others were dead and in pieces, now being fed into the maw that seemed to flow through the material to where it was needed. If it weren't for the many tales of adventurers and the stories of mimics and their like, Edgar would have sworn himself mad at the sight of it. The crackling of wood piercing bone as one was pierced through his chest, the limb expanding as if it were a frog's neck, tortuously creating a cavity through which the maw flowed freely to devour his body from the inside out. The last of the two would-be burglars screaming as they fled out of the door, covered in what little blood remained from their crew. Almost as quickly as it had changed, the extra limbs and maw of the mimic pulled back and reformed into the chair he knew, not even a spot of blood on it. Still gripping the mace in hand, he carefully approached. Hey now. Why you not going to do that to me, right? He said. The chair didn't budge, and despite his better judgment, he approached it, carefully resting his hand on it. No longer hearing any sounds, both Henrietta and Terry emerged from the back room. Edgar. You're alive. What happened? Where did they go? Henrietta asked. Edgar turned and embraced her, hugging her tight before stepping back. Edgar tried to gather his thoughts. Well, you see, the big guy tripped over the chair and... He continued, weaving another tale about the would-be hero of a chair. Story 3. They were so tasty, the dwarven party that had entered the treasure chamber. I was so satiated that I could not have eaten anything else. That is one of the most blissful feelings one can have. I didn't have visitors in my cave often, so I figured I would have a solid month to digest my meal when I heard the sound of someone else coming my way. I quickly arranged the armor of my last meal along the wall and shifted into the form of a chair, thinking nobody will take some chair when there's treasure to be had. When I awoke from my nap, I was being placed in a room with other furniture. There was a row of stools against a shelf that stuck out in the room. I, in my chair form, was placed in the corner of the room, near a fireplace that provided some heat, but not too much. Bugger. That chair, I found it heavy, you'd think it were stuffed with a couple of dwarves. It's not the most comfortable thing, but I think it will do nicely here by the fire. The man who must have taken me from my lair commented to a woman in a dress and apron. It is a nice chair. Comfy looking, but not so much that people will fall asleep in it and not buy food or drink. I think we will do well here in town after being on the road so much. She took a rag out from her waistband and cleaned their new chair up. I had been stuffed with 2 dwarves, and a halfling. Digestion takes time for one like me. The adventuring types have called me a mimic. I guess because my kind can shape-shift into normal-looking objects like chests, chairs, or tables as we wait for our next meal. We can go a long time between meals, so living in caves is a good life for us. This new life was very different to me, and I initially believed I would stay the couple of months until I needed to eat again, then eat a patron here, and then get out to go find my next cave. While we normally shape-shift into inanimate objects, that doesn't mean our true form is such, or that we cannot shift into something like a dwarf, or halfling, or even human child shape. I can never get the facial details right, so when I have tried that, and attempted to speak, adventurers would immediately panic and start swinging. I'm just trying to live, you know. I eventually digested my meal and was hungry, but people would sit on me, and drop food into the folds of the chair. I would quickly gobble them up. Other times, beer, ale or mead would be spilled on me, and I would absorb that as well. I had a good enough constant diet of spillage that I didn't need to gorge myself on entire beings. I'll admit, I liked the fire. I liked the music the bards would play. I liked the cooking that the matron would serve, and I liked that drunk adventurers would spill more than enough on me that I was well fed. When I needed to relieve myself of waste, I could sneak out while people were sleeping and do that in the alleyway. One night, while doing just that, I noticed a thief trying to break in to rob my new family. On one hand, he was just trying to live and eat, on the other, if he took their gold, or harmed them, I would lose my cushy spot and have to go back to a damp dark cave. That wouldn't do. He never knew I had grabbed him. I didn't realize how much more strength I had with my steady diet of food, it was really easy to gobble him up. I quickly went back to my corner, and resumed my chair form. Marta? Does the chair seem a little puffier to you? I saw the innkeep looking at me intently. His wife walked over and took a good look, then cleaned me with her towel. No, same amount of poof. Of all the treasure we ever found, this has been the one that has really proven its worth. It's been years and that leather hasn't cracked at all, I dare say, it's in better shape now than when we got it out of that cave. And to think, I told you it might smell bad in our new inn. She finished cleaning the chair and gave it a loving pat. If our patrons didn't love sitting in this chair so much, I'd say we bring it up to our living quarters to relax in, but we never relax, do we? With a laugh, she walked away back to the kitchen. Silly thought of me, the man said as he patted the back of the chair. He turned and sat down for a brief moment before his wife told him that they would have customers soon and to take out the rubbish. A little while later, I heard him remark that out near the rubbish pile he found a pry bar under the back window, and marks like someone had been trying to get in. He made a note to secure the window better, and that was that. A couple of nights later, everything was fine, people were happily eating and drinking, the bard came and performed for the people and just had a really great night of it. Until the friends of the guy I had eaten showed up. The door banged open, and 3 men walked in that I had seen/smelled before. They were dressed differently this night, however. They were dressed in all dark blue. One of them held a crossbow with a very nasty-looking quarrel loaded in it, the 2 others had swords at the ready. They walked through the crowd to the stage area and told the folks inside that they all needed to leave. They didn't want to have to kill any heroes. Everybody stayed where they were. We heard a commotion from the back, and saw the woman's 2 children were being brought out by another man, and the wife being forced out by another. He had his hand on the back of her neck and held a dagger menacingly to her throat. "All right, you lot." A voice came from the doorway, "So, we are looking for a friend of ours who was here the other night. Seems that he didn't come home. Now, he was doing the sort of thing that might get a lesser man killed, so, we were surprised that he didn't come back." A man in fine clothing walked in the door and pointed at the owner. "You." The barkeep looked nervous, he worried about his wife and his children. I knew they were his world. "Clear this lot out. We are going to have a conversation about my missing friend. Come on folks, it will be all right. The missus and I will be okay, we didn't do anything to his friend." With that he walked around the tables and talked all of the rough and burly adventurer types to leave, saying things of encouragement. Eventually, it was just the guys in blue, the fancy man, and the barkeep family, oh, and me. I had a vested interest in this situation. The guy holding the kids pushed them towards me, and told them to sit down and keep quiet. They both sat down, and I widened a little to give them room. They sort of noticed and looked at each other, not sure if they should be scared of me, or the men threatening their family. There was one of the guys in blue standing in front of us, but looking mostly at the barkeep and his missus. I knew I needed to act. First, I slurped the 2 kids through me and spat them out behind me against the wall. I then made a face toward them and said, "Stay." This of course horrified them, and they nodded silently. I stood up in my natural-ish bipedal form. I shaped one of my arms into a spike and drove it through the one guarding the kids in front of me while covering most of his face with another pseudopod arm. The spike went completely through him, and I widened it to rip him in half. I reached over with another pseudopod and pulled a table that I overturned in front of the children to shield them. "Stay!" I shouted at them. I mean, I said that, but it probably came out as some kind of roar. I was immediately the center of attention. I felt a stinging sensation in my center mass. Ah, the crossbow. At least it will take them a moment to reload. I grabbed a bench and threw it chest high at that one. It split him in half. I didn't ever remember being this strong. The others in blue surrounded me while the fancy man stepped back towards the door. The fight didn't last long. I have no idea that being well fed would have made this much of a difference. As the last of their pieces dropped, I shot a pseudopod out and blocked the fancy man from leaving. I wrapped around him and dragged him to the barkeep. "Take him," I said. I tried really hard to make sure it sounded like their language. "What?" the barkeep said incredulously. "Help me, kill the mimic," the fancy man said. "I told you there was something up with the chair years ago," the barkeep's wife said. "I also told you we were wrong to assume all the things we met in dungeons were bad." She then spoke some words I didn't recognize, and spoke to me in my language. "Hello, do you understand me now?" "Yes, thank you." "What to do with him?" I squoze the fancy man again, who yelped. "Hey! I think I know where your guy went. I'm guessing he was a thief. He knew his risks." "You knew his risks? Why did you let him come here? You were an old couple with a successful business. You don't pay protection. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that?" He thought for a moment and looked at me. "I think perhaps not knowing you had a pet mimic was an oversight. Who keeps a mimic as a pet?" The barkeep spoke up as he walked around the counter with a hand crossbow. "Karina, Jesse, are you all right?" "Yes, father," they said in unison. He looked at me for a moment, then turned to his wife, "Ask him if he can make this mess go away. I understand your language, I just cannot speak it. I don't get to practice it. Do you understand?" His wife relayed, "He understands us, he just doesn't have the ability to speak like us." Then to me, "All of it? Him too?" I nodded at the fancy man, who started crying and wet himself from fear. "I wouldn't need to eat again for 6 months. Can we trust him not to tell others about our secret?" The barkeep wondered. "Yes. You can trust me, I won't tell a soul," the fancy man wept. "I don't believe him," the wife said. "I can smell a liar, and this man is lying." Her hand moved so quickly, I almost didn't see it, and a dagger's hilt was sticking out of the front of his throat. His eyes went wide, then he passed out. When she removed the dagger, blood spurted a few times, and then stopped. "Go ahead," she nodded to me. They bolted the door after the barkeep came out and told the few people who were waiting outside for the town guard to finally show up. They had been paid off to not come, but eventually, enough people bugged them, and they did. I could hear him assure them everything was fine, but they needed to clean up, and he would reopen on the morrow. It took a while, but I was able to eat them all. When I was done, I went to the corner and resumed my chair form. I was bigger, of course. The next night when patrons were allowed back in, the barkeep said he decided to add more stuffing to that old chair to make it more comfy. They made it a point to feed me every few nights with scraps from the kitchen. There were rumors spoken in hushed whispers that I heard after that fateful night. People talked about how the wife was once a powerful druid and was able to summon a forest spirit to eat all the robbers. Or that the barkeep was a mighty fighter who had slain them all. In any event, things were peaceful, for now. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more, YouTube thinks you might like these videos.